This chapter, the 26th chapter, is called Ganga is Ganga. If you don't know, Ganga, or also known as the Ganges, which is not how you pronounce the original Sanskrit, is a holy river in India. The one in which she bathed and ultimately had her spiritual awakening. It is the summer of 1997. We were on Dharma Yatra, a sacred pilgrimage. In the 1990s and into the first years of the new millennium, my Guru Pujya Swamiji led Dharma Yatras throughout North America, Great Britain and continental Europe, Africa, Indonesia, Australia, New Zealand and Fiji, ministering to the Indian diaspora throughout the world. When Indians move abroad, a concern that arises, especially amid the economic prosperity of the West, is how to pass on the dharma to their children. This dharma is not dogma, religion, commandments, or canon. It is fluid enough to adjust to changing times and places, yet eternal and enduring in its roots, which are nourished by and in return nourish the river of life. These Dharma Yatra were pilgrimages to ignite a recommitment to Dharma primarily, but not exclusively in people of Indian origin who were living abroad, to rekindle in their minds and hearts the fire of love for their own heritage. Be American where your professional life is concerned, Pujya Swamiji would urge on the US pilgrimages, but be Indian where your personal and domestic life are concerned. He also said, don't worry about giving your children cars, worry about giving them sanskaras, ethics, value, culture. Swamiji typically would spend one night per city leading these high-intensity spiritual events, ardent and energetic lectures on the importance of maintaining a connection to Indian culture, devotional songs led by well-known Indian musicians, and free vegetarian feasts were the typical components for crowds numbering from several hundred to tens of thousands, depending on the city. His yatras had another component as well, to raise awareness about the work of compiling the 11-volume Encyclopedia of Hinduism. From the Sanskrit root dhri, which means to support or hold or bear, dharma means that which protects us and holds us together. Living in accord with dharma protects, preserves, and upholds individuals, communities, and societies. It includes, but isn't limited to, the concept of right path, and it also includes aspects of traditional Indian culture and heritage, close family ties, service for the less fortunate, having a personal relationship with God, and adhering to norms established over thousands of years. When I returned to India in early April 1997, it never occurred to me I'd be back in the United States a few months later as part of a caravan of religious leaders instilling the teachings of Hindu spirituality in second and third generation Indians in America. Swamiji, I know you say God is everywhere, I asked him when we were in Los Angeles for a day en route between San Diego and Bakersfield. So why do I feel God so much more strongly in Rishikesh than I do here in Los Angeles? Which is ironic, isn't it? Because isn't that Spanish for the angels? We stood in my parents' living room as a car pulled up to drive him away. Swamiji was staying with devotees he'd known for many years, but he had agreed to come to bless my parents' home. Why was he so generous of time, energy, and spirit to me? How, less than a year after I met him, had I persuaded him to spend half an hour at my parents' house? People beg him for years to make a 10-minute stop at their house just to step inside the front door and bless their home. This is a question I continue to ponder more than 2 decades later. I was persistent and fragile in my faith. My idea of faith included the expectation that, yes, of course, the object of my faith would behave how I wanted him to. Swamiji was actually acutely aware. I think I added the word actually. Swamiji was acutely aware of the anxiety my parents were experiencing. It had been less than a year since my life had been transformed. Everything seemed new and exciting and fresh. For them, it had been a year of wondering what the hell had happened to their daughter. A year earlier, she had apparently been happily married and on the verge of completing her PhD, and would surely give them grandchildren in the near future. Now, she was celibate, living in India, chanting Sanskrit, dressed in 5 yards of fabric, and traveling around the United States, spreading the culture of Hinduism. Funny enough, I learned about how much fabric it takes to make a kilt the other day, which isn't exactly related, but I thought of it when thinking about 5 yards of fabric. You know, it takes 9 yards of fabric to make a kilt, and that's where the saying, "and the whole 9 yards" comes from. I would never have expected that. The more you know. Thankfully, without me having to beg, he had agreed to come to the house. My anxiety about preparations in the house prior to his arrival was rivaled only by what I had experienced the night before science fair projects were due when I was younger. What if something had been left undone? What had I forgotten? What if it wasn't good enough? Wasn't right? I spent the afternoon doing my best impression of an Indian lady. I bought roses at the florist, and tied them together to make garlands of sorts to hang over the room he would occupy for half an hour. I made my mom buy brand new sheets and towels, which I dyed orange in her washing machine. "But he's not going to sleep or bathe here," she pointed out, as if I'd forgotten the obvious. "It doesn't matter," I insisted. "The sheets on the bed must be new. There must be a towel, whether he's going to bathe or not." He didn't even go into the bedroom or the bathroom. He came for about 20 minutes and sat with my parents in the living room, where he drank the cup of tea I prepared without laughing at my pitiful attempt at making Indian tea or spitting it out. When it was time to go, I remembered the elaborate bedroom preparations and implored, "Please come and see the room." Compulsive attention to detail and bed making and room arranging did not come naturally to me. I'm not a homemaker by nature. My high school didn't have home ec classes, and I didn't go to finishing school or cotillion. I've never heard of that. I'm learning so many new words. Cotillion. Cotillion. Or cotillion. I don't know how to pronounce this word. You can teach me. The only beds I ever made were ones we short-sheeted in summer camp, a prank to retaliate against counselors who had scolded us. But I had channeled an Indian Martha Stewart on steroids all afternoon, and she would not go away until Swamiji saw the room. He walked in while I made sure he noticed the roses taped to the door frame. Then he looked around, smiled, put his hands gently over his heart, and closed his eyes for a moment in prayer. Then he walked out. The brand new, perfectly dyed sheets and towels did not get touched. I assume they got blessed, though. As we stood in the living room before Swamiji left, I asked him the question percolating in my mind since we'd arrived the day before. My parents had gone outside to the driveway to greet the people picking him up. Why do I feel God so much more strongly in Rishikesh than I do here in Los Angeles? I asked in a rare and precious moment alone. He smiled and said, "God is everywhere. You know that. God is just as much here as in Rishikesh. But," he smiled even more, and the twinkle in his eyes seemed brighter than the halogen ceiling light, But Ganga is Ganga. Yes, and yes. Yes, God can be felt and experienced and connected to anywhere in the world. And yes, there is a uniqueness, a qualitative difference to life in Rishikesh, where Ganga flows from the Himalayas. I could have had a spiritual awakening anywhere, yet it happened in Rishikesh, the place where saints, sages, and rishis have flocked for thousands of years. I love that verb choice, flocked. Now I'm just imagining all these sages with their arms flapping as they fly in the air. The Upanishads remind us, Isha vasyam idam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat. The whole universe is pervaded by the divine. There is no one, nowhere, and nothing that is not pervaded by the divine. And yet, there are whirlpools of divine energy that grab us, don't let go, carry us out to sea and transform us. That happened to me in Rishikesh. As my head figuratively bobbed up miles from shore, I realized I'm alive. I'm not even gasping for air, for the ocean has become my lungs. My eyes are open and clear. I can see. Perhaps I died in the current, but I continue to feel more alive than ever. Yes, and yes, God is everywhere, and Ganga is Ganga. Thank you for listening. We'll pause our reading there. What a beautiful quote. Indeed, although this divinity, that is by definition all-pervasive, can be found within anyone and anything, there are places you're perhaps a little more likely to find it. It is these places that we take pilgrimage to, for instance. But we can take a pilgrimage wherever we go, not just without to a far-off distant land, but inwardly, because there the divine shines ever so brightly.